I used to believe home was a place where love would always protect you. The warmth of familiar walls, the sound of laughter bouncing off wooden floors, the lingering scent of Mom's rosemary bread filling every corner. I thought home was permanent, unshakable. But what happens when the one place that should shelter you becomes the battleground where you fight for your very existence? My name is Emma Taylor, and this is how I lost everything, only to discover I had the power all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Portland was like living inside a painting. Our craftsman home nestled among tall pines, morning fog rolling through the neighborhood, and the constant patter of rain creating the soundtrack of my childhood. The house itself wasn't particularly grand, but it felt magical to me. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors worn soft from decades of footsteps, and a garden my mother tended with religious devotion. Every corner held memories, from the height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe to the window seat where Mom and I would curl up during thunderstorms. My father, Robert, everyone called him Rob, worked as an architectural engineer for the city. He designed bridges and public buildings, always coming home with blueprints rolled under his arm and a faraway look in his eyes. He was quiet, but steady. The kind of dad who wouldn't say much but would spend hours teaching me how to build the perfect model airplane or fix the squeaky step on our porch. And then there was my mother, Jennifer. She was everything warm and bright in my world. A high school art teacher who filled our home with color. She had this laugh that started deep in her chest and bubbled up like champagne, infectious and free. Her hands were always stained with paint or clay, and she smelled like turpentine and lavender. Mom turned ordinary moments into adventures. Grocery shopping became treasure hunting. Rainy days transformed into indoor camping trips with blanket forts and shadow puppets. Our traditions weren't fancy, but they were ours. Sunday mornings were sacred. Mom would make her famous lemon ricotta pancakes while Dad brewed coffee so strong it could wake the dead. We'd eat on the back porch when weather permitted, wrapped in blankets if it was chilly, planning our day together. Once a month, we'd pile into Dad's old Volvo wagon and drive to the coast, windows down despite the chill, belting out songs from Mom's worn Beatles cassettes. Dad couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but Mom and I would harmonize around his off-key attempts, laughing until our sides hurt. Mom taught me photography when I turned 13, gifting me her vintage Nikon, a camera that had traveled with her across Europe before she met Dad. "The world looks different through a lens, Emma," she told me. "You get to choose what deserves to be remembered." That camera became an extension of myself, capturing everything from Dad's concentrated frown as he worked on his models to Mom's hands kneading bread dough on winter afternoons. The backyard garden was Mom's pride. Not just flowers, though she loved her dahlias, but vegetables and herbs that fed us through summer and fall. She'd installed a small greenhouse where we'd start seedlings together each spring. "Growing things teaches patience," she'd say, guiding my hands as we pressed tiny seeds into soil. "And faith that something invisible now will become beautiful later." Life wasn't perfect. Dad worked long hours sometimes. Mom worried about money, and they occasionally argued in hushed voices after they thought I'd gone to sleep. But love was constant, reliable as the old grandfather clock in our hallway. I felt safe within those walls, protected by parents who, despite their flaws, put me at the center of their universe. I was 17 when things began to change. Mom started getting headaches, small ones at first, easily dismissed with ibuprofen and a nap. Then came days where light hurt her eyes so badly she'd pull the curtains and lie in darkness. She grew tired more quickly, needing to rest after activities that had once energized her. The studio in our backyard, her sacred creative space, sat empty more often than not. "Just migraines," she'd insist, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about, sweet pea." But I noticed the whispered phone calls, the way Dad's face tightened when Mom mentioned feeling dizzy, the growing collection of prescription bottles in the bathroom cabinet. I pretended not to see the pamphlets from the hospital that appeared in Mom's nightstand drawer, or the way she'd sometimes pause mid-sentence, struggling to find a word that should have come easily. The day everything truly began to unravel started ordinarily enough. I came home from school to find Mom standing in our kitchen, staring at the fridge as if she'd forgotten why she'd opened it. When she turned toward me, there was a moment, brief, but terrifying, when confusion flickered across her face. "Emma?" she said, my name lifting like a question. "Yeah, Mom, it's me," I answered, setting my backpack on the counter. "You okay?" The moment passed, and she smiled. "Of course, just spacing out." She closed the fridge door. "How was school?" We talked about my day, about the college applications I was working on, about the new darkroom equipment my photography teacher had acquired. Normal things. But something had shifted, like a hairline crack appearing in a foundation. Hardly visible, but threatening everything above it. 3 days later, Mom collapsed while teaching her senior art class. By the time I reached the hospital, doctors were already talking about tumors and aggressive treatment options. Words like glioblastoma and inoperable floated around us, harsh and foreign. Dad stood silent beside Mom's bed, holding her hand so tightly his knuckles went white. I took pictures with my mind then. Mom's dark hair spread across the sterile pillow, Dad's shoulders curved with invisible weight, the afternoon sun casting geometric patterns through Venetian blinds. I knew somehow these were moments I'd need to remember later. The next 8 months passed in a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and hope that rose and fell like tides. Mom came home, determined to spend whatever time remained in the house she loved. We transformed the living room into a bedroom so she wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. The garden went untended, flowers giving way to weeds, but Mom insisted on being wheeled out there on good days. "Remember," she said once as we sat watching bees work the remaining lavender, "this house is more than wood and nails. It's every birthday candle you've blown out, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee and midnight conversation. It's us, Emma." I nodded, throat too tight for words, and took her picture as she gazed at her beloved garden. It was the last photograph I ever took of her. Mom died on a Tuesday in early spring. The cherry trees were blooming along our street, petals drifting like pink snow across the sidewalks. There's a strange silence that fills a house after death. Not just the absence of a voice, but the absence of possibility. No more chances for "I love you" or "I'm sorry" or "remember when?" Just emptiness echoing in rooms that suddenly seemed too large. Dad and I moved through those first weeks like ghosts. He took leave from work. I missed school. We ordered takeout that sat uneaten on the kitchen counter. We fielded casseroles from neighbors and accepted hugs from relatives who appeared and disappeared in a fog of sympathy. At the funeral, I stood beside Dad, both of us wooden and distant, as people told stories about Mom that somehow didn't capture her at all. They meant well, but they hadn't known how she hummed off-key while folding laundry, or the specific way she tilted her head when truly listening to someone. The hardest part came when everyone left, when the phone stopped ringing with condolences, when it was just Dad and me rattling around in rooms that held Mom's absence like another presence. He retreated to his home office, burying himself in work once he returned to his job. I wandered from room to room, touching Mom's things, her paintbrushes still soaking in a jar, her gardening gloves stiff with dried soil, her books marked with train tickets used as bookmarks. One night, about 2 months after the funeral, I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, staring at Mom's collection of ceramic mugs. "She always chose the chipped ones," he said, not looking up. "Said they had more character." I sat across from him. "Yeah, she used to say perfect things don't tell good stories." Dad smiled faintly. "Your mother and her stories." He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 47 years. "I don't know how to do this, Emma. how to be here without her. Me neither, I admitted. It was the first honest conversation we'd had since Mom died. We established a fragile routine. Dad worked longer hours, often coming home after I'd gone to bed. I focused on finishing my senior year, applying to colleges, developing photographs in the darkroom at school since I couldn't bear to use Mom's studio. We ate separately, lived separately, grieved separately, orbiting each other without connecting. But at least we were functioning. 6 months after Mom died, Dad started coming home earlier. He shaved more regularly, put actual food in the refrigerator, asked about my college acceptances. I thought we were healing, finding a new normal. Then I came home from school one day to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a woman I'd never seen before. "Emma," Dad said, standing awkwardly. "This is Diana Brooks. We work together at the city planning office." Diana was nothing like Mom. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Where Mom had been soft curves and wild dark curls, Diana was sleek angles and carefully highlighted blonde hair. Mom dressed in paint-splattered jeans and oversized sweaters. Diana wore a crisp blouse and tailored slacks. Mom's laugh had filled rooms. Diana's smile seemed precisely calculated. "I've heard so much about you," Diana said, extending a manicured hand. "Your father talks about you constantly." I shook her hand briefly, noticing the way she sat in Mom's chair as if she belonged. "There. Nice to meet you," I lied. Over the following weeks, Diana appeared more frequently, for dinner, for weekend outings, for movie nights where she occupied the space on the couch next to Dad that had always been Mom's. I tried to be polite. Dad seemed happier, less hollow-eyed, but every time Diana touched something of Mom's or suggested rearranging the furniture to bring more light into the room, I felt physically ill. She started staying overnight sometimes. I'd come downstairs to find her in our kitchen, brewing coffee in Mom's French press, wearing one of Dad's shirts. She was unfailingly pleasant, asking about my photography, my college plans, offering to take me shopping. But there was something calculated about her interest, as if she were checking boxes on a list titled, "How to Win Over Your Boyfriend's Daughter." "She's not trying to replace your mother," Dad told me one evening after Diana had left. "But Emma, it's been almost a year. Life has to move forward." "It hasn't even been a year," I corrected, the injustice burning in my throat. "Mom's garden hasn't even gone through a full cycle without her." Dad sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Diana makes me feel less lost. I need that right now. I'm asking you to try, for my sake." How could I argue with that? So I tried. I answered Diana's questions at dinner. I accepted her offer to help with college financial aid forms. I didn't comment when she began moving things around in our house, replacing Mom's eclectic throw pillows with matching ones, switching out our mismatched plates for a coordinated set, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets in a way that made no sense to me. But then came the day I found her in Mom's studio, sorting through canvases and supplies, a large donation box beside her. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway, my voice tight with shock. Diana turned, seemingly unsurprised by my presence. "Oh, Emma, your father mentioned it might be time to clear this space out. It's just sitting here gathering dust, and we thought it might be easier if I handled it." "We? Dad agreed to this?" The betrayal felt like ice water in my veins. "He said it's been difficult for both of you to deal with her things." Diana's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help with the hard steps of moving forward." I stepped into the studio, my mother's sacred space, now being dismantled by this stranger. These aren't just things. This is all that's left of her. Diana sighed, setting down the brushes she'd been sorting. "Emma, I understand this is difficult. but your mother wouldn't want this room frozen in time like a museum. She'd want it used, appreciated. Don't, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Don't tell me what my mother would want. You never knew her. Something flickered across Diana's perfectly composed face. Irritation, perhaps, or impatience. But she quickly smoothed it away. You're right. I apologize. Why don't we do this? Together, when you're ready, you can decide what to keep and what to donate. I wanted to believe her, to think she truly cared about my feelings. But as she left the studio, I noticed she'd already placed some of Mom's finished paintings in the donation box. Beautiful landscapes of the Oregon coast that had been waiting. For a gallery showing that never happened because Mom got sick. I rescued the paintings after Diana left, hiding them in my closet along with Mom's brushes and her sketchbooks. That night, when Dad came home, I confronted him. Did you tell Diana she could clean out Mom's studio? Dad looked uncomfortable. We discussed it. The house needs freshening up. Diana thinks, I repeated. What about what Mom would think? What about what I think? Emma, Dad's voice held a warning. Diana is going to be around for a while. We need to make space for that. The implication hung in the air between us. Make space. As if Mom had taken up too much room, as if her memory was an inconvenience to be tidied away. 2 weeks later, Dad took me to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. The kind of place we'd never gone as a family because Mom preferred casual diners where she could sketch on paper placemats. Diana was there, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than all the clothes in my closet combined. I knew what was coming even before the ring appeared. Diana and I are getting married, Dad announced after the appetizers arrived. In June. 3 months away. Not even a full year after Mom died. We'd like to do it in the backyard, Diana added, reaching for Dad's hand. Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends. I've always loved your garden. My garden. Mom's garden. The sacred space where I could still feel her presence most strongly. And Emma, Dad continued, Diana will be moving in next month. She's already given notice on her apartment. I sat frozen, fork suspended above my untouched salad. Moving in, getting married, taking over our home, Mom's garden. It was happening too fast, like watching a car crash in slow motion but being unable to stop it. Say something, sweetheart, Dad prompted. What could I say? That I wanted to scream? That I felt like they were burying Mom all over again? That every change Diana made felt like erasing another trace of the woman who had given me life? Congratulations, I managed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I hope you'll be happy. Later that night, as I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, I remembered something strange. Shortly before Mom died, she'd had a private conversation with her mother, my grandmother Margaret. They'd sent me out for coffee, and when I returned, both had tear-streaked faces but seemed oddly peaceful. Mom had mentioned paperwork and mentioned my 25th birthday specifically. At the time, I'd been too overwhelmed with her illness to question it. Now, staring at the ceiling as plans for a wedding unfolded below me, I wondered what Mom had been arranging in her final weeks. What provision she might have made for me, knowing she was leaving. I wouldn't find out for years to come, not until long after Diana had completed her takeover of our family home. Not until after I'd lost nearly everything that connected me to my mother. Not until the day Diana learned, to her shock, that the house she'd been so eagerly remodeling had never truly been hers to change. Diana moved into our house on a rainy Sunday in April. I watched from my bedroom window as Dad carried her pristine leather suitcases up the front steps, careful not to let them touch the wet ground. She brought remarkably little for someone who was supposedly moving her entire life. Just clothing, some framed certificates, and a single box of personal items. It occurred to me that perhaps she had been planning this all along, slowly acquiring new things that would better fit her vision for our home. The weeks that followed were a quiet war of attrition. Each day, another piece of Mom vanished. The colorful ceramic wind chimes that had hung from our porch for as long as I could remember were replaced with sleek metal ones that made harsh, tinny sounds in the breeze. The mismatched vintage teacups Mom had collected from thrift stores disappeared from the kitchen cabinets, making way for a matching white porcelain set. Even the refrigerator door, once plastered with my childhood artwork and family photos, was cleared to maintain what Diana called a cleaner aesthetic. I began hiding things, small mementos of Mom that I couldn't bear to lose. Her favorite earrings, the dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre she read every year, the lumpy clay bowl I'd made her in 3rd grade. I kept them in a shoebox beneath my bed, taking them out at night when the house was quiet, touching each object like a talisman against forgetting. One evening in May, Dad called me down to dinner. This had become an increasingly formal affair since Diana's arrival. No more eating from plates balanced on our laps in front of the TV. Now we sat at the dining table with cloth napkins and wine glasses, water for me, making stilted conversation. "Emma," Diana began, carefully cutting her salmon into precise bites. "I've been thinking about the upcoming wedding." I nodded, pushing food around my plate. The wedding was a month away, and I'd been trying not to think about it. "Your father, and I agree that this is a perfect opportunity for some renovations." The word hung in the air like something toxic. "Starting with repainting the exterior. That mustard yellow is a bit dated, don't you think?" The yellow had been Mom's choice. She'd spent weeks collecting paint samples before finding the exact shade that, as she put it, looks like the sun is always shining on our house, even in Portland winter. "I was thinking a classic gray," Diana continued, "with white trim. Much more sophisticated." I looked at Dad, waiting for him to defend Mom's choice, to say something, anything, about how much she had loved that color. He stared at his plate. "And the garden needs a complete overhaul," Diana added, warming to her theme. "All those wild-looking plants, it's a bit chaotic. I'm thinking something more structured, Japanese-inspired perhaps, clean lines." Mom's garden had been deliberately wild, a riot of native plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, herbs spilling out of their beds, flowers in every color blooming in successive waves throughout the seasons. "The garden stays as it is," I said quietly. Diana's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "Excuse me?" "The garden was my mother's. It stays exactly as she designed it." "Emma," Dad's voice carried a warning. "Diana is trying to help. The garden has been neglected since your mother got sick. It needs attention. Then I'll take care of it. I know what Mom planted, how she wanted it maintained." Diana set down her fork with deliberate calm. "Emma, I understand your attachment, but sometimes letting go of the past is the healthiest way forward. Your father and I are creating a new chapter, and a new chapter doesn't mean erasing the previous ones," I interrupted, feeling my face flush with anger. "That garden is all that's left of her work, her art." "There are landscapers coming next week," Dad said firmly. "It's already arranged." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my father's face. "So I don't get a say? In my own home?" "You're 17, Emma," Diana said smoothly. "These aren't decisions for you to make. Besides, you'll be leaving for college soon." I'd been accepted to several schools, including Rhode Island School of Design, my dream program for photography. But as Diana spoke, I realized with sudden clarity that I couldn't leave. Not now. Leaving meant surrendering completely, allowing every trace of Mom to be erased. "I've decided to defer college for a year," I announced. The words surprised even me, but as soon as they left my mouth, I knew they were true. "I'm staying here." Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "That's Ridiculous. You've worked so hard for Rist. I need time, I insisted. I'll work, save money, build my portfolio. RISD will still be there next year. What I didn't say, I need to protect what's left of Mom. I need to make sure you don't forget her entirely. Diana and Dad exchanged glances, having one of those silent adult conversations that excluded me. We'll discuss this later, Dad finally said, returning to his dinner. But there was nothing to discuss. I had made up my mind. The real turning point came a week later. I'd spent the morning at a job interview at a local coffee shop, and when I returned home, something felt immediately wrong. The house was quiet. Dad at work, Diana supposedly at a hair appointment. I climbed the stairs to my room, planning to change clothes, when I noticed my door was ajar. I never left my door open. Pushing it wider, I froze. My room had been transformed. The photography, prints I'd tacked to my walls, candid shots of Mom in her garden, Dad working on models, our trips to the coast, were gone. The vintage camera collection I'd started after Mom gave me her Nikon had vanished from my bookshelf. Even my bedspread was different. Now, a pristine white duvet instead of the colorful patchwork quilt Mom and I had sewn together when I was 12. Panic rose in my throat as I frantically searched drawers in my closet. Most of my clothes remained, though they'd been reorganized. But when I dropped to my knees and reached under the bed for my memory box, the shoebox containing Mom's treasures, my fingers met empty air. No, 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 I whispered, lying flat on my stomach to see better. The box was gone. I tore through the room, pulling out drawers, emptying the closet, desperate to find those irreplaceable mementos. Nothing. Then I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps in the hall below. Diana's voice humming tunelessly. I flew down, the stairs barely registering my own movement until I stood before her in the kitchen. She was unpacking shopping bags, placing new stemware into the cabinets. Where are my things? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight and dangerous. Diana startled slightly, then composed herself. Emma, I was going to tell you when you got home. I've freshened up your room as a surprise. Doesn't it look more grown up now? Where are my things? Each word punctuated with barely controlled rage. She sighed, setting down a crystal wine glass. The clutter had to go, Emma. A clean space means a clean mind. Most of it was just gathering dust anyway. My mother's things were not clutter, I said, my voice rising. Where did you put them? Diana's eyes hardened slightly. The photographs were taped to the wall. They were damaging the paint. I took them down. The odds and ends, that old shoebox of junk. Junk? The word felt like a slap. We're cluttering your space unnecessarily. I've donated them to the women's shelter downtown. They can use... I didn't hear the rest of her sentence through the roaring in my ears. Donated. Given away. Mom's treasures, handled by this woman who had no right, packaged up and disposed of like trash. How dare you? I whispered. Those were mine. This attitude isn't helping anyone, Emma, Diana said, her voice taking on that reasonable adult tone that made me want to scream. Your father and I agreed that the house needs to move forward from being a shrine to Jennifer. It's not healthy for any of us, especially you. Dad agreed to this? To getting rid of my personal belongings without asking me? Diana's slight hesitation told me everything. He doesn't know, I realized aloud. You did this on your own. I'm trying to help this family heal, Diana said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions. Your father is too emotional about these things too, caught up in guilt to see clearly. I turned away from her, heading for the door. Where are you going? Diana called after me. To get my mother's things back, I said without turning around. Don't be absurd. They've likely been processed already. Besides, they're just objects, Emma. Letting go is part of growing up. I whirled back to face her. They weren't yours to let go of. Something unpleasant flickered across Diana's perfect features. Annoyance, perhaps, or anger at being challenged. But she quickly smoothed it away, replacing it with a concerned smile that didn't reach her eyes. When you calm down, you'll see this was for the best. Now, I'm making chicken piccata for dinner. Why don't you help me prep the vegetables? The casual dismissal, the expectation that I would simply fall in line after what she'd done, it was too much. I left without another word, slamming the door behind me. The women's shelter was across town. I took 2 buses to get there, rehearsing what I would say, trying to control the trembling in my hands. By the time I arrived, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the street. The woman at the reception desk was kind, but firm. Donations are processed immediately, honey. The items are already distributed to residents or put out for the public donation shop. We can't track individual pieces. Please, I begged. These are the only things I have left of my mother. They're irreplaceable. Her eyes softened with sympathy. You can check the shop. It's down the hall. Anything that came in today would be there. But I can't promise. I spent 2 hours combing through the shelter's donation shop, growing increasingly frantic as I searched. I found one of Mom's scarves, a blue silk one with tiny hand-painted butterflies that she'd worn on special occasions. And miraculously, buried in a box of miscellaneous items, the dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre, with her notes still scribbled in the margins. But the rest, her earrings, the clay bowl, the small watercolor she'd painted of our garden, were gone. When I got home, dinner was over. Diana was loading the dishwasher, and Dad sat at the table with paperwork spread before him. I placed Jane Eyre and the butterfly scarf on the table in front of him. "Did you know?" I asked simply. Dad looked at the items, then up at me with confusion. "Know what?" Diana threw away Mom's things. My things. She donated them without asking. "Did you know?" Understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by discomfort. "Emma?" Diana was trying to help. "Your room was—" "Stop defending her," I cut him off. "Just stop. Those were all I had left of Mom, and she got rid of them like they were garbage." Diana appeared at my side, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I didn't throw away anything, Emma. I relocated items that were causing you to dwell unhealthily on the past. Robert, tell her this is for the best." Dad looked between us, conflict evident on his face. For a moment, I thought he might side with me, might recognize the violation for what it was. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Emma, I know you're upset, but Diana's intentions were good. Maybe this is an opportunity to let go of some of the weight you've been carrying." The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it left me hollow. I hadn't expected him to choose me over Diana. That hope had died long ago. But I had expected, at minimum, that he would understand what had been taken from me. "The weight I've been carrying," I repeated slowly, "is the memory of my mother. Your wife. If that's too heavy for you now, that's your choice. But it wasn't yours or Diana's choice to make for me." I picked up the book and scarf, cradling them against my chest like injured creatures. "I'm going to Olivia's for the night. I can't be here right now." Dad started to protest, but Diana placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let her go, Robert. She needs time to process." As if my grief was a tantrum to be waited out. As if I was a child who didn't understand what was best for me. I spent the night at my best friend Olivia's house, curled on her bedroom floor in a sleeping bag, crying until I had no tears left. Olivia sat with me, braiding and unbraiding my hair the way we used to do at middle school sleepovers. "You could stay here longer," she offered. My mom wouldn't mind, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. The next morning, I returned home, slipping in quietly and heading straight to my room. My sterile, Diana-approved room that no longer felt like mine. Over the next few weeks, I tried to maintain a fragile peace. The wedding was approaching, and I didn't have the energy for constant battle. I smiled when appropriate, answered questions when asked, and spent as much time as possible out of the house. I took extra shifts at the coffee shop where I'd been hired, volunteered at the local community darkroom to develop photographs, and visited my grandmother whenever possible. Grandma Margaret lived in a small apartment about an hour away. She was Mom's mother, a retired librarian with Mom's same dark curls, now streaked with silver. Since Mom's death, our visits had become a lifeline, the only place I could talk freely about Mom without seeing discomfort shadow someone's face. "This won't last forever," Grandma told me during one visit as we sorted through old family photos together. "Your mother made sure of that." "What do you mean?" She smiled enigmatically. Jennifer always looked ahead, always had a plan. She selected a photograph, Mom at my age, wild-haired and laughing beside a campfire. "She'd be proud of you standing your ground." I wanted to press her for more information, to understand what Mom might have arranged, but something in Grandma's expression told me she wouldn't elaborate further. The wedding took place in June, as planned. Not in our backyard. Mom's garden had indeed been demolished by landscapers, replaced with geometric beds of identical plants and a stone pathway that looked like it belonged in a corporate office park rather than a family home. Instead, they married at a hotel downtown, in a sterile ballroom with tasteful floral arrangements that bore no personality at all. I wore the dress Diana had selected for me, pale blue, conservatively cut, and stood beside Dad at the altar, as his best woman. I'd argued against this role, but Dad had insisted, saying he needed me there. In the end, I agreed, not for Diana's sake, but for what remained of my relationship with my father. During the reception, as couples swayed on the dance floor and distant relatives made small talk over cake, I slipped outside to the hotel's garden. The evening air smelled of roses and car exhaust. Nothing like Mom's garden with its riot of herbs and wildflowers. I took out my camera, not Mom's Nikon, which I kept hidden now, but a digital one I'd saved for, and photographed the twilight sky, trying to capture something of what I felt. Not enjoying the party? I turned to find Jack Chen, Olivia's older brother, leaning against a garden wall. Jack was home from college for the summer, working at his parents' restaurant. We'd known each other all my life, though we'd never been close. Not particularly, I admitted. He nodded, hands in the pockets of his dress pants. "Olivia told me about your stepmom. Sounds pretty rough." I shrugged, not wanting to get into it. It is what it is. My aunt was like that when she moved in. With my grandparents. Rearranged everything. Threw out Grandpa's old fishing gear because it was cluttering the garage. He gave a wry smile. Grandma let her do it, then secretly went to the dump and retrieved everything. Kept it all in a storage unit until my aunt went back to Taiwan. The story surprised a laugh out of me. Smart woman, your grandma. She knew what mattered. Jack studied me for a moment. "What matters to you, Emma Taylor? What's the thing? You're not going to let anyone take?" The question caught me off guard. What did matter now? Mom was gone. The house was transformed. Even her garden had been destroyed. What was left to fight for? "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "Everything feels like it's slipping away." Jack nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then maybe it's time to build something new. Not replacing the old stuff, just creating something that's yours, something no one can take away." I considered his words, turning my camera over in my hands. Maybe. When I returned to the reception, Diana was cutting the cake, Dad's hand over hers on the knife, both smiling for the photographer. I captured the moment out of habit, though I knew I'd never display the photo. Then I took pictures of the guests, not the posed, smiling shots that would go in the official wedding album, but the genuine moments in between. My grandmother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Dad's college friend laughing too loudly after too much champagne. A young cousin spinning in circles until she collapsed in a dizzy heap of tulle and ribbons. These were the moments that mattered, I realized. Not the polished, perfect ones Diana cultivated, but the messy, human ones Mom would have loved. After the wedding, life at home became increasingly untenable. Diana was no longer making an effort to win me over. She'd achieved her goal, married my father, moved into our home. Now she seemed merely irritated by my presence, by the way I still insisted on calling it Mom's studio rather than the guest room, by my stubborn refusal to embrace her vision of our new family. The final straw came in August, a month before. I was due to start classes at Portland Community College, my compromise after deferring rised. I came home from my shift at the coffee shop to find my belongings piled in the hallway outside my bedroom. "What's going on?" I asked, finding Diana directing a handyman who was assembling a crib inside what had been my room. "Oh, Emma," Diana said, as if surprised to see me in my own home. "I meant to tell you, we're converting this room into the nursery." I stared at her. "Nursery?" She rested a hand on her still flat stomach, a smug smile playing at her lips. "We wanted to tell you properly, but yes, you're going to be a big sister. We just found out last week." The news hit me like a physical blow. Dad and Diana were having a baby, a new family formed over the ashes of my old one. "And my room?" I managed to ask. "We've set up the den downstairs for you. It's smaller, of course, but since you'll be at college most of the time anyway." She trailed off with a vague gesture. "Your father thought you wouldn't mind, considering you'll be moving out eventually." Dad wasn't even here for this conversation, I noted. He'd left it to Diana to displace me from my childhood bedroom, to inform me about a sibling that would further cement my outsider status in this new family dynamic. "I see," was all I could say, too numb to argue. The den was half the size of my former bedroom, with no closet and windows that faced the neighbor's brick wall rather than the garden. My bed barely fit, with just enough space left for a small desk and dresser. My books and remaining belongings had been hastily stacked on the floor. As I attempted to organize the cramped space, I found a framed photograph lying face down behind the dresser. Picking it up, I recognized it immediately. Mom, Dad, and me at the coast 3 years earlier, our last vacation before Mom got sick. We were laughing, windblown and sunburned, arms around each other. I couldn't remember Diana handling this picture, couldn't imagine why she would have kept it rather than donating it with the others. Then I noticed the frame had been broken. The glass cracked in one corner as if it had been dropped or thrown. The realization was like ice water in my veins. Diana hadn't simply relocated this photo. She'd damaged it, deliberately or in anger, then hidden the evidence. I held the broken frame against my chest, fresh grief washing over me. It wasn't just that Diana was taking over our home or displacing me from my room. She was actively trying to erase any memory of my mother, any evidence that Dad had had a life, had loved someone before her. That night, after Diana and Dad had gone to bed, I crept back upstairs to what had been my bedroom. The crib stood half assembled in the center, surrounded by boxes of baby items Diana had already begun collecting. The walls had been stripped of my posters and photos, awaiting the pale yellow paint Diana had selected. Standing there in the moonlight, I made a decision. I couldn't stay. Not just in this house, but in Portland. Every day here was another battle, another piece of Mom erased, another reminder that I no longer belonged in my own home. I would go to Boston after all, not to RISD. It was too late for this fall, and the tuition was beyond what I could manage. Alone, but somewhere. Community college maybe, or just work until I figured out my next step. I had savings from my coffee shop job. I had my camera. I had Grandma Margaret, who would understand why I needed to leave. What I didn't know then, as I stood in the shell of my former bedroom planning my escape, was that leaving wouldn't be the end of my story with this house. It would be just the beginning of a long game that Mom had set in motion before she died. I Game Diana had no idea she was playing, and one she was destined to lose. Boston in September was nothing like Portland. The air felt different, drier, crisper, tinged with the promise of a harsher winter than I'd ever experienced. The sounds were different too. More sirens, more voices, more urgency in the rhythm of daily life. Everything moved faster here, as if the entire city was perpetually late for an important appointment. I'd found a tiny studio apartment in Allston, a neighborhood popular with students due to its relatively affordable rents. Relatively being the operative word. My savings from the coffee shop had covered the security deposit and first month's rent, but I'd need income quickly to stay afloat. The apartment itself was barely larger than my converted den back home. A single room with a kitchenette against one wall, a bathroom so small I could touch all 4 walls without moving, and a window that faced another brick building. But it was mine. No Diana rearranging my belongings, no nursery preparations, no painfully polite conversations with Dad that carefully avoided any mention of Mom. I'd left Portland with minimal drama, a note on the kitchen counter informing Dad I'd decided to go to Boston after all, a bus ticket purchased with my savings, most of my clothes and my camera equipment packed into 2 suitcases. I'd called Grandma Margaret from the bus station, assuring her I was okay, promising to check in when I arrived. She hadn't seemed surprised by my decision. "Your mother did the same thing," she'd said, her voice crackling over the poor connection. "Packed up and moved to New York after college with nothing but a duffel bag and her camera. Adventure is in your blood, Emma." But this didn't feel like an adventure. It felt like exile. Finding work was my first priority. I updated my resume at the public library, applied to every coffee shop within walking distance of my apartment, and picked up shifts at a diner that needed weekend help. Between the 2 jobs, I could just cover rent and basic expenses, with little left over for photography supplies or savings. Contrary to my plans back in Portland, I didn't immediately enroll in community college. The timing was wrong. Classes had already started, and more importantly, the residency requirements meant I'd pay exorbitant out-of-state tuition for the first year. Instead, I found a community darkroom that offered affordable memberships, allowing me to continue developing the film photographs I took in my limited free time. Photography became my lifeline in those early months. Through my lens, Boston transformed from an impersonal city of strangers into a collection of moments and details. Morning light filtering through autumn leaves in the public garden, elderly men playing chess in Harvard Square, students lounging on the banks of the Charles River during the last warm days of fall. I documented it all, building a visual diary of my new life. Dad called 3 days after I left, his voice strained with a mixture of anger and concern. "You could have talked to me before running away, Emma," he said. "Like you talked to me before giving away my bedroom?" I countered. The old hurt rose easily to the surface. He sighed heavily. "That was poorly handled. I should have been the one to tell you. But Emma, you're 17. Legally, you should be..." "I'll be 18. In 2 months," I interrupted. "I'm supporting myself. I have a safe place to live and 2 jobs. I'm fine." "2 jobs?" His voice softened slightly. "Emma, you don't need to do this. Come home. We can figure things out. You can have the den, make it your own space. Diana feels terrible about how all this happened." The lie was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Diana had likely celebrated my departure, thrilled to have me out of the way as she prepared for her baby. My replacement in the family portrait. "I'm staying in Boston," I said firmly. "This is what I want." After a long pause, Dad asked, "Do you need money?" Pride made me want to refuse, but practicality won out. "I could use help with community college tuition when I enroll for spring semester, if that's possible." "Of course," he said quickly, relief evident in his voice at being able to offer something concrete. "Just let me know how much. And Emma, we miss you." I doubted "we" included Diana, but I let it pass. "Thanks, Dad. I'll keep in touch." Our conversation settled into a pattern after that. Brief calls every week or two, surface-level updates about my jobs or his work, careful avoidance of any mention of Diana's pregnancy or changes to the house. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before Mom died, but it was something. A fragile thread still connecting me to my old life. Winter in Boston hit like a physical force. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest had prepared me for rain and grayness, but not for the bone-deep cold that settled over the city in December. Not for snowdrifts taller than I was. Not for winds that cut through my inadequate coat like it was made of tissue paper. I spent my meager Christmas bonus on a proper winter jacket and boots, sending Dad a photo as proof that I was adapting to East Coast life. On my 18th birthday, Grandma Margaret sent a care package, warm socks, homemade cookies that reminded me of Mom's recipe, a gift card for a photography supply store, and a legal-looking envelope that she instructed me not to open until I was alone. That night, after my shift at the diner, I opened the envelope in my quiet apartment. Inside was a letter from my mother, written in her familiar flowing script, dated just weeks before she died. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, you've turned 18, and I'm not there to celebrate with you. I'm so sorry for that, for all the birthdays and graduations and ordinary Tuesdays I'll miss. But know that I'm thinking of you right now, as I write this, imagining the amazing young woman you're becoming. There are practical matters we need to discuss. I've arranged for a small trust fund to help with your college expenses. Grandma Margaret has the details and will help you access it. It's not a fortune, sweetheart, but it should ease the financial burden as you pursue your dreams. More importantly, I need to tell you about the house, our home. When your father and I purchased it, we set up the ownership in a specific way, with legal provisions that would activate upon my death. The house is currently in a trust, with your father having the right to live there until you turn 25. At that point, full ownership transfers to you. I didn't make this arrangement because I anticipated problems. I made it because the house was always meant to be yours eventually. Our gift to you, a foundation for your future. Your father knows about this arrangement, though we haven't discussed it much since my diagnosis. Emma, I'm not telling you this to create conflict or to drive a wedge between you and your father. I'm telling you because knowledge is power, and I want you to have both. Whatever choices you make about the house when the time comes will be the right ones, because they'll be yours to make. Remember that the house is just wood and stone. It's the love we filled it with that matters. That love isn't contained by walls. It travels with you, wherever you go. I love you infinitely and eternally, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. The house was mine, or would be mine when I turned 25. Dad knew this, had known it all along, even as he allowed Diana to remake it in her image, to erase Mom's presence, to push me out of my own bedroom. Did Diana know? Somehow I doubted it. The way she'd taken ownership of every space, the confident manner in which she'd discussed long-term renovation plans, it suggested she believed the house would be hers indefinitely. The revelation left me dizzy with conflicting emotions. Vindication, that Mom had provided me with this unexpected power. Anger, that Dad had concealed this information as Diana systematically dismantled the home Mom had created. Confusion about what this meant for my future, and for the baby that would be my half-sibling, growing up in a house that would eventually belong to me. I didn't tell Dad about the letter. Some instinct, perhaps inherited from Mom's foresight, suggested that this knowledge was mine to hold close for now. Winter gave way to spring, bringing with it a sense of renewal. I'd enrolled in community college classes, focusing on photography and business courses that I hoped would eventually lead to a career in commercial photography. My portfolio was growing, showcasing Boston's seasonal transformations and its diverse residents. I'd even sold a few prints to local cafes, not enough to quit my other jobs, but enough to validate that my work had value. In April, I received a text from Dad with an attached photo. My half-brother, Noah Taylor, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, born at 3:17 a.m. The baby in the image had a shock of dark hair and tiny furrowed brows that reminded me, with a pang, of Dad. I stared at the photo for a long time, unsure how to feel. This tiny person shared my blood but would grow up in a completely different family than the one I'd known. Would Diana tell him about Mom? Would Dad share stories of our family before? Or would Noah grow up believing that his parents' life together was all there had ever been? I sent a polite congratulations text, unsure what else to say. Dad called an hour later, sounding exhausted but happy. "He's perfect, Emma," he said. "You should come meet him." The invitation caught me off guard. I hadn't been back to Portland since leaving 8 months ago. The thought of seeing the house again, of seeing Diana in my mother's role, made my stomach clench. "I can't just now," I hedged. "Finals are coming up, and my work schedule is packed." "In the summer, then," Dad pressed. "We could buy your ticket." "Maybe," I said, non-committal. "Let's see how things look in a few months." In truth, I had no intention of returning to Portland anytime soon. The house, my house, I reminded myself, had become almost mythical in my mind, a battleground I wasn't ready to revisit. Summer in Boston brought sweltering heat that made me miss Portland's moderate climate. My studio apartment, lacking air, conditioning, became nearly uninhabitable during the day. I spent hours in air-conditioned libraries and coffee shops, studying or editing photos, returning home only when the evening brought slight relief. One hot July afternoon, as I nursed an iced coffee in my favorite cafe near campus, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Portland number. "Emma? It's Olivia's mom, Susan Chen." I sat up straighter, instantly concerned. Mrs. Chen had no reason to call me unless something was wrong. "Is Olivia okay?" "She's fine, dear. I'm calling about your grandmother. Margaret Wilson? She asked me to contact you." My heart raced. "Is Grandma all right?" "She's in the hospital. Nothing life-threatening," Mrs. Chen added quickly. "A minor heart episode, but she's asking for you, and I promised her I'd help get you home." Home. The word landed heavily. "I can book you a flight on our credit card," Mrs. Chen continued. "Jack will pick you up from the airport. Your grandmother was very clear that she didn't want your father or his wife involved just yet." The specific exclusion of Diana spoke volumes. "I can pay for my own ticket," I said, "but thank you. Please tell Grandma I'll be there as soon as I can." 24 hours later, I was in a rental car with Jack Chen, driving from Portland International Airport to the hospital. The familiar landscape of Oregon passed outside the window, so green after Boston's urban sprawl that it almost hurt my eyes. "Thanks for the ride," I said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. Jack and I had never been close friends, despite our sister's bond. He nodded, eyes on the road. "No problem. Grandma Wilson was pretty insistent that it be me, not my parents. Said there were things she wanted to discuss privately." I frowned. "Did she say what things?" "Nope, but she seemed pretty determined for a woman who'd just had a cardiac event." He glanced at me. "You doing okay? Boston treating you well?" "I'm managing," I said. It was the truth, if not the whole truth. I was surviving in Boston, building a life that was entirely my own. But, well, might have been a stretch. Jack seemed to read between the lines. "Olivia showed me some of your photos on Instagram. They're good, really good." The compliment warmed me unexpectedly. "Thanks. It's just a hobby right now, but I'm hoping to make it more." "It will be," he said with unexpected certainty. "You've got the eye for it." At the hospital, Jack waited in the lobby while I went up to Grandma's room. She looked smaller than I remembered, propped against white pillows, her silver hair arranged neatly despite the hospital setting. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, brightening when I appeared in the doorway. "There's my girl," she said, extending. a hand toward me. Right on time. I kissed her papery cheek, fighting back tears. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed her steady presence until this moment. You scared me, Grandma. Mrs. Chen said you had a heart episode? Minor arrhythmia, she said dismissively. They're keeping me for observation, but I'll be home tomorrow. The doctors are being overprotective. I sat in the chair beside her bed. Why didn't you want Dad to know you're here? Grandma's expression grew serious. Because what I need to discuss with you concerns Robert, and I wanted us to have privacy. She reached for a folder on her bedside table. I have your mother's letter here, the one about the house trust. I know you've read it. I nodded, wondering where this was leading. What Jennifer didn't explain fully, Grandma continued, was that there are conditions to the trust. Your father has the right to live in the house until you're 25. Yes, but that right is contingent on maintaining the property in good faith. She handed me the folder. These are photographs taken by a private investigator I hired last month. The exterior changes, the garden remodeling, the interior renovations, they potentially constitute a violation of the trust terms. I flipped through the photos, my heart sinking. The house was almost unrecognizable, painted a sterile gray, just as Diana had planned. Mom's garden was completely gone, replaced with formal hedges and uniform flower beds. Even the wide front porch where we'd spent so many summer evenings had been enclosed to create additional interior space. I don't understand, I said, looking up from the images. Are you saying Dad could lose the house before I turn 25? Grandma nodded. If we can prove that the changes significantly devalue the property or fundamentally alter its character against the terms of the trust, yes, the house could revert to your control immediately. I sat back stunned. But they have a baby now. Noah would lose his home. That's why I wanted to speak with you privately. This decision must be yours alone, Emma. Your mother never intended the trust to be a weapon, only a protection for your inheritance. But she couldn't have foreseen how quickly Robert would remake his life, or how thoroughly this Diana person would erase Jennifer's presence. I thought of Mom's studio, transformed into a nursery. My bedroom, given away without consultation. Mom's belongings, donated or discarded as clutter. The pain of those losses remained sharp. What would happen if I did pursue this? I asked quietly. You'd need to file a petition with the trustee. That's me, by the way. I would present the evidence to the court. If successful, Robert and Diana would be given reasonable time to relocate, perhaps 30 to 60 days. The house would become yours immediately. And I'm only 18, I murmured. I can't afford to maintain it. The trust includes provisions for maintenance costs until you're 25, Grandma explained. Your mother thought of everything. Emma. She always did. I stared at the hospital wall, trying to imagine the consequences of such an action. Dad, Diana, and baby Noah, forced to leave the house they believed was theirs. The inevitable family rupture. The public nature of such a legal proceeding in our small community. I need time to think about this, I finally said. Grandma patted my hand. Of course you do. And that's exactly what I told the trustee's lawyer when he called last week. But Emma, her voice grew serious, you should know that there's a timing consideration. The trust gives us 1 year from the date of significant alterations to contest them. Based on these photos, that clock started ticking when they painted the exterior and removed the garden. We have approximately 4 months left to file if we choose to. The deadline added pressure I didn't need. Does Dad know about these conditions? In the trust? He signed the documents, Grandma said. Whether he read them closely or remembers the details now, I can't say. I nodded, my mind racing. I'll think about it, Grandma. I promise. She squeezed my hand. That's all I ask. Now, tell me about Boston. Are you eating enough? You look thin. We spent the next hour discussing my life in Massachusetts, my classes, my photography, the small achievements I'd managed since striking out on my own. I didn't mention my 2 jobs, or the constant financial stress, or the nights I cried myself to sleep missing the family I'd once had. Some truths weren't helpful for a grandmother in a hospital bed to hear. As visiting hours ended, I kissed her goodbye, promising to see her again before I returned to Boston. "Will you visit your father while you're here?" she asked. I hadn't planned to. The thought of seeing the transformed house, of meeting Diana in her role as new mother, made my chest tight with anxiety. But avoiding them entirely felt cowardly. "I'll think about it," I said, echoing my earlier response. On the drive back to the Chen family home, where I'd be staying during my visit, Jack was unusually quiet. "Everything okay with your grandmother?" he finally asked as we neared his neighborhood. "Physically, yes," I said carefully. "She wanted to discuss some family business." He nodded, not pressing further. "You planning to see your dad and the baby?" "I haven't decided." I turned to look out the window, watching familiar landmarks. "Past it would be awkward." "Probably," Jack agreed. "But you know what my grandfather always said? Discomfort is the price of growth." He meant it about muscle training. He was a physical therapist, but I think it applies to emotional stuff too. I smiled despite myself. "Are you giving me life advice, Jack Chen?" "Just repeating wise sayings of my ancestors," he said, returning the smile. "Ancient Chinese secret." "Your grandfather was born in Seattle. Still counts." He pulled into his family's driveway. "Look, whatever's going on with your family, it sounds complicated. Just know you've got people in your corner, okay? Me, Olivia, my parents. We're Team Emma." The simple declaration of allegiance nearly undid me. I'd been so focused on standing alone, proving my independence, that I'd forgotten the value of having people on my side. "Thank you," I said softly. That night, lying in Olivia's childhood bedroom, she was away at college in California, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Grandma's revelation. The power to reclaim my house immediately was both tempting and terrifying. Justice for how I'd been treated, for how Mom's memory had been erased. But at what cost? Would I become the villain in this story? The spiteful daughter who threw a family with a newborn out of their home? I reached for my phone and pulled up the photo Dad had sent of Noah. His tiny face, so innocent and new, gazed back at me. Whatever sins Diana and Dad had committed in remaking the house, this baby bore no responsibility for them. With sudden clarity, I knew I needed to see the house again, to see what remained of my childhood home, to meet my half-brother, to confront the changes directly before I could decide what to do about them. Tomorrow, I would call Dad and tell him I was in Portland. It was time to face what I'd been running from. My father's voice sounded strange over the phone, a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite identify. Relief, perhaps, or wariness. "You're in Portland? Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "It was last minute," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. "Grandma Margaret needed some help. I didn't mention the hospital. I thought maybe I could stop by and see you, and meet Noah." A pause, then, "Of course, we'd love that. Are you free for dinner tonight? Around 6? The formal invitation to what had once been my own home felt surreal. 6 works. Great. I'll tell Diana. She'll be pleased. The hesitation told me everything about how Diana would actually feel about my visit, but it didn't matter. This wasn't about her. I spent the day with Grandma Margaret, who had been discharged from the hospital as predicted. Her small apartment was filled with potted plants that reminded me of Mom's gardening passion. We talked about Boston, about my photography classes, about everything except the house and the decision looming before me. As evening approached, I changed into the nicest outfit I'd packed, dark jeans and a simple blue blouse that had once belonged to Mom. I'd taken it when I left Portland, one of the few pieces of her clothing Diana hadn't yet donated. Jack offered to drive me to the house. "I can wait nearby," he suggested, "in case you need a quick escape." The gesture touched me. "Thanks, but I'll be okay. I can call an Uber if things get uncomfortable." "If you're sure." He glanced at me as we pulled away from his parents' home. "You look nervous." "I am," I admitted. "I haven't seen my dad in almost a year. I've never met my half-brother. And Diana is still horrible," he supplied. I gave a small laugh. "Presumably. I don't expect people to fundamentally change." The closer we got to my old neighborhood, the tighter my chest felt. When we turned onto my street, I almost asked Jack to turn around. Then the house came into view, and my breath caught. It was worse than the photographs had shown. The warm yellow exterior was now a cold slate gray. The wide, welcoming porch where Mom and I had spent countless summer evenings reading together had been enclosed with windows to create some kind of sunroom. The front yard, once wild with native plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds, was now landscaped with identical boxwood shrubs arranged in perfect symmetry. It looked like a completely different house, which I supposed was exactly what Diana had wanted. "Jesus," Jack murmured. "They really did a number on it." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, pulling to the curb. No, I wasn't sure at all, but I nodded anyway. "I need to see it. All of it." "Call me if you need an extraction," he said as I got out. "I mean it. Anytime." I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment after Jack drove away, staring at this unfamiliar version of my childhood home. Then, drawing a deep breath, I walked up the new stone path and rang the doorbell. A sleek, modern fixture that had replaced the old brass one Mom had loved. The door swung open to reveal my father, looking both older and somehow more polished than when I'd left. His beard was neatly trimmed, his casual clothes clearly expensive. The familiar smile lines around his eyes deepened as he registered my presence. "Emma," he breathed, then pulled me into a tight hug. I allowed myself a moment of weakness, breathing in his familiar scent, timber and coffee and the same aftershave he'd always used. For just a second, I was a child again, safe in my father's arms. Then I heard Diana's voice from inside. "Robert, is she here?" Dad released me, stepped back. "Come in," he said unnecessarily, as if I were a guest in this house that would someday be mine. The interior transformation was even more dramatic than the exterior. The warm, eclectic home of my childhood, with its mismatched furniture collected over years, its walls covered in family photos and Mom's artwork, had been replaced by a sterile showroom. Everything was white or gray or chrome, with occasional pops of navy blue that I assumed were Diana's idea of adding personality. No family photos were visible, no artwork that wasn't generic and mass-produced, no evidence that this had once been a home filled with love and creativity. Diana appeared in the foyer, a baby nestled against her shoulder. She looked remarkably unchanged, still sleek and perfectly put together, as if childbirth and new motherhood hadn't touched her at all. "Emma," she said with a practiced smile. "What a surprise." "I was in town visiting my grandmother," I explained, not bothering to return the smile. My attention was focused on the baby, his head covered in dark, downy hair. Diana noticed my gaze and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is Noah," she said, turning slightly so I could better see my half-brother's face. "He just had his 4-month checkup. The doctor says he's developing beautifully right in the 95th percentile for height." The pride in her voice was genuine, perhaps the first authentic emotion I'd ever heard from her. "He's beautiful," I said, meaning it. Despite how I felt about Diana, there was no denying that Noah was a perfect baby, chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed, regarding me with unabashed curiosity. "Would you like to hold him?" Dad asked. Before I could answer, Diana interjected smoothly. Let's get settled in the living room first. Noah gets fussy if his routine is disrupted. The living room was what we'd always called the front room. The space where Mom's piano had stood, where we'd opened Christmas presents, where Dad had built elaborate blanket forts for me on rainy weekends. Now it contained a pristine white sectional sofa, glass coffee tables, and a massive television mounted on the wall. No sign of the life we'd once lived here. We sat awkwardly, Dad and Diana on the sofa, me in a stiff armchair that seemed designed for appearance rather than comfort. Noah squirmed in Diana's arms, making small, discontented noises. He's probably hungry, Diana said, standing. I'll feed him upstairs, back in a moment. As she departed, taking Noah with her, I understood the maneuver for what it was. A deliberate denial of my request to hold the baby. Diana was already establishing boundaries, making it clear that Noah was hers, not a bridge between me and my father. Once we were alone, Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm so glad you came, Emma. We've missed you. The house looks different, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Dad glanced around, as if seeing the changes through my eyes for the first time. Diana has a good eye for design. She wanted to brighten the space, modernize it a bit. Modernize it, I repeated flatly. By erasing every trace of Mom? Of our family? Dad's expression tightened. That's not fair, Emma. We needed a fresh start. The house was full of memories. Those were all I had left of her, Dad. He sighed heavily. I know this has been difficult for you, but life moves forward. Diana and Noah are my family now, too. The words stung more than I'd expected. And what am I? You'll always be my daughter, Dad said quickly. Always. But you're an adult now, building your own life in Boston. We're just trying to build ours here. I looked around at the sterile, soulless room that had once been warm and full of life. By pretending Mom never existed, there isn't a single photograph of her in this room, not one piece of her artwork, nothing. Dad had the grace to look uncomfortable. Some of her things are in storage. I kept her paintings, her important pieces. They're just not displayed right now. Because Diana doesn't want reminders of your previous life, I finished for him. It's not that simple, Emma. Diana has insecurities about living in the house. Jennifer and I shared. She needs to feel like this is her home, too. I bit back a sharper response, reminding myself why I was here. Not to fight with Dad, but to see the house, to understand what remained and what was gone before making my decision about the trust. Can I see the rest of the house? I asked. Dad looked relieved at the change of subject. Of course. Let me give you the tour. The tour was a journey through loss. My old bedroom, now Noah's nursery, had been painted a soft blue with nautical accents, anchors and sailboats and lighthouses. A far cry from the vibrant space filled with photography and memories that had been mine. The den that had briefly been my replacement bedroom had been converted into a home office for Diana, with a sleek white desk and expensive-looking ergonomic chair. Where are you working these days? I asked Dad as we passed through the kitchen, now unrecognizable with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I have a setup in the garage, he said. Diana thought it would be good to separate workspace from living space. Diana seemed to have thoughts about everything in the house, none of which included preserving anything of the home my mother had created. When we reached the backyard, I stopped short. The transformation here was the most painful of all. Mom's beloved garden, the native plants she'd nurtured, the herbs she'd grown for cooking, the wild flowers that had attracted so many birds and butterflies, was completely gone. In its place were uniform beds of matching plants, a large stone, patio with outdoor furniture that looked like it belonged at a resort, and a pergola draped with wisteria that had certainly not been planted by my mother. Even the greenhouse where Mom and I had started seedlings together each spring had been removed. There was no trace of her passion, her touch, her vision for this space. "The landscapers did a great job, didn't they?" Dad said, misreading my silence for appreciation. "Diana wanted something lower maintenance, more suitable for entertaining." I couldn't speak. The loss felt physical, a hollowness expanding in my chest. "Emma, are you okay?" Dad's voice seemed to come from far away. "No," I managed finally. "No, I'm not okay. This was Mom's garden, her special place. You've erased her completely." Dad's expression hardened. "That's not fair. We couldn't keep everything exactly as Jennifer left it forever. Life changes. People adapt." "This isn't adaptation," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "This is obliteration. You've let Diana systematically remove every trace of Mom from this house, from our lives. It's like you want to pretend she never existed." "That's enough." Dad's tone was sharp, a warning. "I understand you're upset about the changes, but Diana is my wife now. This is our home. We have the right to make it work for our family." The word "our" hung between us, a clear delineation. Dad, Diana, and Noah were a unit. I was outside that circle, a visitor from a past life. "Do you even remember her anymore?" I asked quietly. "Mom?" Dad's face softened slightly. "Of course I do, Emma. I loved your mother very much, but grief can't rule our lives forever. At some point, we have to move forward. Moving forward doesn't have to mean forgetting." Before Dad could respond, Diana appeared at the patio door, Noah in her arms. "Everything all right out here?" Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes were watchful. "Fine," Dad said quickly. "I was just showing Emma the yard." "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Diana smiled, gesturing to the soulless landscape. "So much more functional than before. We're thinking of putting in a play structure for Noah next summer." She bounced the baby gently. "He's settled now if you'd like to hold him, Emma." The abrupt shift, from territorial claiming of the yard to offering her child, caught me off guard. I wondered if she'd overheard our conversation, if this was her way of diffusing tension. Or perhaps it was something more calculating, a reminder that she had given Dad something I never could. A new child, a second chance at family. "I'd love to," I said, extending my arms. Noah was heavier than he looked, solid and warm. He studied my face with solemn eyes that reminded me painfully of Dad's. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a toothless, drooling grin that pierced straight through my defenses. "Hi, Noah," I whispered. "I'm your big sister." His tiny hand reached up, grasping a strand of my hair with surprising strength. Something shifted. Inside me, a complicated tangle of emotions I couldn't quite unravel. This innocent baby was my brother. Whatever I felt about Diana, about Dad's choices, about the transformation of our home, Noah deserved only love. "He likes you," Dad said, his voice warm with something like hope. Diana's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had cooled. "He's very social. The pediatrician says it's a sign of advanced development." We moved inside as the evening air grew chilly. Dinner was a stilted affair. A perfectly prepared meal that tasted nothing like the food of my childhood. Diana dominated the conversation, talking at length about Noah's developmental milestones, their plans for the house, more renovations apparently, and her volunteer work with the hospital auxiliary board. She asked perfunctory questions about Boston, my studies, my photography, but her interest seemed forced, her attention wandering before I finished answering. Dad was quieter, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, perhaps, or regret. He asked more genuine questions about my life, but there was an awkwardness between us that had never existed before. After dinner, as Dad cleared, the table, some things at least hadn't changed. Diana gestured for me to follow her to the living room. She settled on the sofa, arranging herself carefully, then fixed me with a direct look. "I know you think I've taken your mother's place," she said without preamble. "But that was never my intention. Your father needed to move forward, Emma. The house was like a mausoleum when I met him. Everything preserved exactly as it had been when Jennifer was alive. It wasn't healthy." "So you thought erasing every trace of her was the answer?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Diana sighed, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "I didn't erase her. I simply helped Robert create a space that wasn't dominated by grief. The changes to the house are physical, Emma. They don't change the memories. They change the connection to those memories," I countered. "The greenhouse where Mom taught me to start seedlings, the piano where she played, the porch where we read together on summer nights. Those physical spaces mattered." "Perhaps to you," Diana said coolly. But Robert was ready to let go. I doubted that. More likely, Dad had simply been too worn down by grief to fight Diana's systematic dismantling of our home. Too eager for the comfort she offered to recognize the price she was extracting. "Noah deserves a happy childhood," Diana continued, her voice softening as she glanced toward the kitchen where Dad was loading the dishwasher. "Not one overshadowed by a ghost." The calculated mention of Noah struck its intended target. Whatever I felt about Diana, about the changes to the house, I didn't want to disrupt my half-brother's life. He deserved stability, security, the very things I'd lost when Mom died. "I want Noah to be happy," I said honestly. "And Dad, too." Diana's expression brightened, as if sensing victory. "Then perhaps we can start fresh, Emma. Put the past behind us. You're welcome to visit any time, to be part of Noah's life. We could be a family, in a new way." The offer seemed genuine, which made it all the more unsettling. Diana was extending an olive branch, but on her terms, in her redesigned house, with her rules. A relationship where I would be the occasional visitor, the half-sister who lived across the country, while she remained at the center of what had once been my family. "I'll think about it," I said, non-committal. Dad returned from the kitchen, looking relieved to find us in seemingly civil conversation. "Coffee? Dessert?" Diana made her famous tiramisu. I checked my watch, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating perfection of this house that was no longer my home. "Actually, I should get going. My friend is picking me up soon." Dad's face fell. "So soon? You just got here." I promised Grandma I'd get back at a reasonable hour. She tires easily these days. The excuse wasn't entirely fabricated. Grandma Margaret had been instructed to rest following her hospital stay. "Will we see you again before you leave for Boston?" Dad asked. I hesitated. This visit had answered my questions about the house, about what remained of Mom's presence here, nothing. But it had raised new questions about my path forward. "I'm not sure. My return flight is in a few days." Diana touched Dad's arm lightly. "We should let Emma decide, Robert. She's got her own life now." The subtle emphasis on her own life underscored her message. I didn't belong here anymore. Dad walked me to the door, lingering on the front step as I texted Jack for my ride. The summer evening was warm, the air scented with flowers that Mom hadn't planted. "I'm glad you came," Dad said softly. "It means a lot to me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without saying something I'd regret. "Emma, I know things are different now. The house, our family situation, but you'll always be my daughter. Always." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me. "I know, Dad. And I want you to know Noah, to be part of his life. He should grow up knowing his big sister." I thought of the baby who had grabbed my hair, who had smiled at me without reservation. "I'd like that too." Dad hesitated, then asked, Is Boston really where you want to be? So far from home? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Home. Where was that now? Not this gray house with its perfect landscaping and soulless interior. Not the tiny studio apartment in Boston where I was just scraping by. Home had died with Mom, had been systematically erased by Diana's renovations. I'm figuring that out, I said finally. Jack's car appeared at the curb, saving me from further conversation. Dad hugged me tightly before letting me go, his embrace, conveying all the things we hadn't been able to say to each other. I love you, kiddo, he whispered. Never forget that. As Jack drove away, I watched my father in the rearview mirror, standing alone on the front step of the house that was no longer my home, but would someday legally be mine. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the perfect facade Diana had created around him. That bad? Jack asked after a few minutes of silence. Worse, I admitted. They've changed everything. There's nothing left of Mom there. Nothing. He nodded, eyes on the road. So what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with the knowledge Grandma Margaret had shared, with the power the trust gave me? I could force Dad and Diana out of the house, reclaim it as my own. But to what end? The house I'd loved was gone, transformed into something unrecognizable. And what about Noah? Could I really justify disrupting his life to satisfy my own sense of justice? I don't know yet, I told Jack. I need to think. The next morning, I visited Grandma Margaret again. She was looking better. Some color returned to her cheeks as she pottered around her apartment, watering her plants despite my protests that she should be resting. Nonsense, she said. Nurturing living things is good for the soul. Your mother understood that. She set down her watering can and fixed me with a penetrating look. You saw the house. It wasn't a question. Yes. And? It's gone. Everything that made it our home, everything that connected it to Mom. Diana has erased it all. The words felt inadequate to describe the systematic obliteration I'd witnessed. Grandma nodded, unsurprised. I expected as much. That woman saw Jennifer as competition from the beginning, even after death. Especially after death. They have a baby now, I said. My half-brother, Noah. He's innocent in all this. Of course he is. Grandma settled into her favorite armchair, gesturing for me to join her on the sofa. Children always are. The question is what you want to, do about the house, Emma. The trust gives you options, but the choice must be yours. I sank onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I don't know, Grandma. Part of me wants to enforce the trust conditions, to take back what Mom intended for me. But another part is thinking of the baby, she finished for me. Of your father, of the consequences. Yes. I twisted my hands in my lap. Would Mom have wanted me to do this? To force them out? Grandma considered the question carefully. Your mother created the trust to protect your inheritance, to ensure you would always have a home to return to. But Jennifer wasn't vindictive. She wouldn't have wanted you to use the trust as a weapon. Then what should I do? Just wait until I'm 25? Let Diana continue destroying everything Mom created? There might be a middle path, Grandma said thoughtfully. A way to honor your mother's intentions without creating unnecessary hardship. What middle path? Either I enforce the trust or I don't. Grandma smiled enigmatically. Sometimes, Emma, the most powerful position is one your opponent doesn't know you hold. You've confirmed that the house has been substantially altered against the trust conditions. That information gives you leverage, whether you choose to use it immediately or not. I frowned, trying to follow her reasoning. You're saying I should what? Threaten Dad with the trust conditions? Blackmail them into what? They can't undo what they've already changed. Not blackmail. Grandma corrected firmly. Negotiation, on your terms, from a position of strength. The idea began to take shape in my mind. I didn't have to choose between enforcing the trust immediately or waiting until I turned 25. There was a third option, using my knowledge and legal position to create conditions of my own. I need to talk to Dad, I said slowly, without Diana present. Grandma nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like Jennifer's daughter. The next day, I called Dad and asked him to meet me for coffee at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory, far from Diana's sphere of influence. He agreed readily, perhaps sensing an opportunity to repair the strained farewell from my visit. I arrived early, securing a quiet table in the corner, my heart pounding with the weight of what I was about to reveal. When Dad walked in, looking slightly harried but smiling when he spotted me, I almost lost my nerve. This was still my father, still the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me when Mom died. But he was also the man who had allowed Diana to erase Mom from our home, who had chosen comfort over preservation. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as he sat down across from me. "I wanted to talk privately before I head back to Boston." Dad's expression grew serious. "Is everything okay, Emma? You seemed upset when you left the house yesterday." "I was upset," I admitted. "I still am. But that's not why I asked you here." I took a deep breath, then met his eyes directly. "Dad, do you remember the details of the trust Mom set up for the house before she died?" He stiffened slightly, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips. "The trust? Of course. It transfers ownership to you when you turn 25. That's still years away, Emma." "That's part of it," I agreed. "But there were conditions attached to your continued residence in the house. Conditions about maintaining the property in good faith, about preserving its essential character." Dad set down his cup slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization. "Emma, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that the changes you and Diana have made to the house, painting the exterior, demolishing Mom's garden, transforming the interior, potentially violate the terms of the trust. According to Grandma Margaret, who is the trustee, we could petition the court to enforce those conditions immediately." All color drained from Dad's face. "You would do that? Force us out of our home? With a baby?" The hurt and betrayal in his voice cut deep, but I held firm. "That's not what I want, Dad. But I need you to understand that the house isn't just yours to remake, as if Mom never existed. It's my inheritance, the home she created for us, the place she loved. And watching Diana systematically erase every trace of her has been..." I swallowed hard. "It's been like losing Mom all over again." Dad looked down at his hands, silent for a long moment. "I never meant to erase Jennifer," he finally said, his voice low. "I just needed space to breathe, to move forward." Diana was insistent about the changes, and it seemed easier to agree than to fight. The admission confirmed what I'd suspected. Diana had driven the transformation, and Dad had acquiesced, too worn down by grief to resist. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said, leaning forward. "I won't enforce the trust conditions now. I'll wait until I'm 25, as originally planned. But in exchange, I want several things." Dad looked up, wary but listening. "First, Mom's artwork comes out of storage. Her paintings go back on. The walls, not all of them, but some. Invisible places, not hidden away in a spare room." Dad nodded slowly. "Diana won't like it, but that's reasonable. Second, the photographs of our family, of Mom, need to be displayed again. Noah should grow up knowing who his brother's mother was." This request seemed to touch something in Dad. "You're right," he said softly. "He should know Jennifer, even if only through pictures and stories." "Third," I continued, gaining confidence, "I want a section of the garden restored, just a small area, but planted with Mom's favorite flowers, the native species she loved, A memorial garden, if you will. Dad was silent, considering. And if I agree to these terms, then I'll sign a document promising not to challenge your residency before my 25th birthday. You and Diana and Noah can stay in the house until then, without fear of legal action. And after you turn 25, when the house becomes yours? I hadn't thought that far ahead. When I turned 25, would I want to claim the house? Force Dad and Diana to move? So much could change in 7 years. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, I said. But Dad, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to hurt you or to punish Diana. I'm doing it to preserve Mom's memory, to ensure that Noah knows he had another mother figure in his life, even if indirectly. Dad reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I understand, Emma, and you're right. I've let things go too far. Jennifer deserves better. You deserve better. The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. So you'll talk to Diana, make her understand? I'll do more than talk. I'll insist. There was a new determination in his voice. The house may look different now, but it's still our family home. All of our family, including Jennifer. As we parted outside the cafe, Dad hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, Emma, he whispered. For everything. I hugged him back, feeling some of the tension between us finally begin to dissolve. I'm not trying to live in the past, Dad. I just don't want it erased. I know, he said. And neither do I. Not really. As I watched him walk away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house would never be exactly as it had been when Mom was alive, but pieces of her would return. Her art, her photographs, a garden growing with the plants she had loved. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A compromise that honored both the past and the future. And in 7 years, when the house legally became mine, I would face another decision. But that was far away, and for now, I had won a small but significant victory for Mom's memory, and for myself. I returned to Boston with a strange mixture of victory and melancholy settling in my chest. The meeting with Dad had gone better than I could have hoped. He had agreed to my terms, promised to stand up to Diana, committed to bringing pieces of Mom back into the house. But the painful reality remained. The home I had known was irretrievably altered. No negotiation could restore the yellow exterior, rebuild the greenhouse, or recreate the exact feeling of the spaces where Mom and I had made our memories. As summer faded into fall, I threw myself into my studies at the community college, taking extra photography classes and building my portfolio. My part-time jobs at the coffee shop and diner provided just enough income to maintain my tiny apartment and cover basic expenses. The trust money Grandma Margaret had mentioned helped with tuition, easing that particular burden. Dad kept his word. Within weeks of my return to Boston, he began sending photos. Mom's landscape of the Oregon coast hanging in the dining room, family pictures restored to the hallway, a small plot in the backyard freshly turned for what would become a memorial, garden in the spring. Diana was notably absent from these updates, though Dad assured me she had come around to the idea after some resistance. I wasn't naive enough to believe Diana had experienced a change of heart. More likely, Dad had finally asserted himself, perhaps leveraging the trust conditions as motivation. Whatever the circumstances, seeing Mom's presence gradually returning to the house brought me a measure of peace. In October, a small gallery in Cambridge accepted 3 of my photographs for a group show featuring emerging artists. The validation was intoxicating. My work, displayed on clean white walls, appreciated by strangers who had no obligation to be kind. I sent Dad an invitation, not expecting him to fly across the country for a small exhibition, but wanting him to know about this milestone. To my surprise, he came, alone, having left Diana and Noah in Portland. He stood before my photographs. For a long time, studying the 3 black and white images I'd selected. an elderly woman feeding pigeons in Boston Common, her face etched with a lifetime of stories. A young couple embracing on a rain-slicked sidewalk, oblivious to passers-by. A solitary tree in winter, its bare branches silhouetted against a gray sky. "These are remarkable, Emma," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." The simple acknowledgement that Mom would have cared about this moment, would have celebrated this achievement, meant more than any technical praise could have. Later, over dinner at a small Italian restaurant near my apartment, Dad hesitantly broached the subject of the house. "Diana's been making the changes we discussed," he said, carefully neutral. "The memorial garden will be planted in spring. We're thinking native wildflowers, those purple coneflowers Jennifer loved so much." I nodded, appreciating his effort, though still uncomfortable hearing him discuss Mom with Diana as if they had been friends rather than sequential wives. "That sounds nice." Dad studied me across the table. "Emma, there's something else I want to talk about. The trust." My stomach tightened. Had he changed his mind? Was he going to fight the conditions after all? "I've been thinking about the house," he continued. "About what happens when you turn 25. Diana and I have discussed it, and we've decided to start looking for our own place." The statement caught me completely off guard. "What?" "But that's years away. You don't need to move now." "Not immediately," Dad clarified. "But within the next year or two. Noah is still young enough that a move won't disrupt his sense of stability. And frankly, after our conversation, I've realized something important." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "That house was the home you shared with your mother, the home we created as a family. Diana and I. We should build something of our own, something that isn't shadowed by the past." The acknowledgement that the house rightfully belonged more to Mom's memory and to me than to his new family was unexpected and deeply moving. "Are you sure?" I asked. "This isn't just because of what I said about the trust conditions?" Dad shook his head. "The trust forced me to confront some truths I'd been avoiding. But this decision is about more than legal obligations. It's about respect for Jennifer, for you, and yes, for Diana too. She deserves a home that's truly hers, not one she's trying to remake in her image while fighting ghosts." I hadn't expected this outcome, this voluntary surrender of the house years before. The trust would require it. The prospect of the house becoming available sooner than I'd anticipated raised practical questions I wasn't prepared to answer. What would I even do with the house? I live in Boston now. My life is here. Dad smiled slightly. "That's for you to decide, Emma. You could rent it out, sell it, move back to Portland someday. The point is, it will be your choice, as your mother intended." The waitress arrived with our desserts, giving me a moment to collect my thoughts. When she left, I asked the question that had been lingering since I'd learned about the trust. "Did you know? All this time, did you know that the house would eventually be mine?" Dad looked down at his tiramisu, uncomfortable. "I knew about the trust provisions, yes. Jennifer and I set it up together when she was first diagnosed. But as time passed after her death, as Diana came into my life, I suppose I pushed it to the back of my mind. It was easier not to think about it." "And you never thought to tell me? Even when I was leaving for Boston, feeling like I'd lost my home forever?" "I should have," he admitted. "It was wrong to keep it from you. I told myself you were too young, that it would only complicate your grief. But those were excuses. The truth is, acknowledging the trust meant acknowledging that my time in the house was temporary, that Jennifer had made provisions for a future without me. The painful honesty between us felt new and fragile, like a delicate seedling pushing through soil, vulnerable but full of potential. "What will Diana say when you tell her you want to move?" I asked. A wry smile touched Dad's lips. "She already knows. In fact, she's been surprisingly supportive. I think she's realized that trying to erase Jennifer's memory from the house has been exhausting. Counterproductive, even. A fresh start might be what we all need. As we parted at the train station the next day, Dad hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Emma. Not just for your photography, but for standing up for what matters to you. For not letting me forget your mother." I hugged him back, tears pricking at my eyes. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. Always will." Winter in Boston was brutal that year, with record snowfalls burying the city in white. I continued my classes, worked my jobs, and photographed the transformation of familiar landscapes into crystalline otherworlds. My tiny apartment stayed reasonably warm, though I developed the habit of wearing multiple sweaters indoors to save on heating costs. In January, an unexpected letter arrived from Grandma Margaret. Inside was a check, a substantial one, along with a brief note explaining that she had decided to advance a portion of my inheritance rather than waiting until her death. "Life is for the living," she wrote in her elegant script. "Use this to build the future you want, not the one circumstances have forced upon you." The amount was enough to make a significant difference in my life, to afford a better apartment, to reduce my work hours and focus more on photography, perhaps even to transfer to a 4-year art program for my remaining semesters. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the check, possibilities multiplying in my mind. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through real estate listings in Portland. Not with any serious intent to buy, but out of curiosity about the market in my hometown. Housing prices had increased significantly since Mom and Dad had purchased our house. Even with Grandma's gift and the eventual proceeds from renting or selling the family home, purchasing property in Portland would be a stretch. As I clicked through listings, a familiar address caught my eye. The house 2 doors down from my childhood home was for sale. It was a smaller craftsman, similar in style to our family house, but more modest in size. The interior photos showed a space in need of updating, but with good bones. Original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, a bay window perfect for curling up with a book on rainy days. Without really thinking it through, I emailed the listing agent, asking for more information. It was a fantasy, I told myself, a way of reconnecting with the neighborhood I'd loved, nothing more. But the seed had been planted. What if I did return to Portland someday? Not to live in the house filled with complicated memories, but nearby, close enough to keep an eye on the property, to maintain Mom's memorial garden, to be part of Noah's life as he grew. In February, Dad called with news. They had found a house they wanted to buy. A modern construction in a neighboring suburb with plenty of space for Noah to play. They'd be moving in May. "What about our house?" I asked, still thinking of it as ours despite everything. "It's legally yours in trust," Dad reminded me gently. "We'd need your permission to sell it. Otherwise, we could find tenants until you decide what you want to do. Or," he hesitated, "you could move back, make it your home again." The possibility hung in the air between us. Return to Portland? To the house that had been so thoroughly transformed? The thought was both appealing and terrifying. "I need to finish my degree," I said, not yet ready to commit to any path. Maybe after that. Spring arrived in Boston with a riot of cherry blossoms and daffodils pushing through soil still marked by melting snow. I continued my classes, building a portfolio that increasingly focused on themes of memory, place, and transformation. My photography professor encouraged me to apply to art schools for the fall semester, suggesting my work showed promise for a career in fine art photography. In April, an email arrived from a gallery in Portland. They had seen my work through my online portfolio and were interested in including several pieces in an upcoming show titled Hometown: New Perspectives on Familiar Places. The timing aligned with the end of my spring semester in Boston. I could fly home for the opening stay with Grandma Margaret, see the family house one more time before Dad and Diana moved out. The decision felt right, a circle completing itself. I accepted the invitation. Returning to Portland in early June felt like stepping back in time and forward simultaneously. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth, the quality of light filtering through tall trees, the sound of rain on pavements, all triggered memories that my body remembered even as my mind had begun to move on. Grandma Margaret met me at the airport, looking stronger than she had during my last visit. "The doctors are pleased with my progress," she assured me before I could ask. That minor heart episode was just a warning, not a death sentence. The exhibition opening was a success. My photographs displayed prominently alongside work by other artists with Portland connections. To my surprise, Dad, Diana, and Noah attended. Diana looking uncomfortable but making an effort. Noah, now a toddling 1-year-old who regarded the gallery with wide-eyed fascination. "These are extraordinary, Emma," Dad said, studying my series of photographs documenting abandoned spaces, empty rooms, vacant lots, buildings in transition. The images were haunting, but not without hope. Shadows and light playing across surfaces, in ways that suggested possibility rather than loss. Even Diana offered a compliment, though it came with a characteristic edge. "You've captured something quite evocative, though I admit I prefer art with more color." The following day, I visited the family house for the first time since our confrontation the previous summer. The moving process was well underway. Boxes stacked in the front hall, spaces beginning to empty. But true to Dad's word, Mom's presence had returned. Her paintings hung in the living room and dining room, family photographs lined the hallway, and a small garden of native plants bloomed in a corner of the backyard. "It's not the same as what she planted," Dad acknowledged as we stood looking at the memorial garden. "But the nursery helped us choose species she would have loved. The bees certainly approve." Indeed, several bumblebees were busily investigating the purple coneflowers and Oregon grape, just as they had in Mom's original garden. The sight brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not of grief this time, but of gratitude. This small plot at least honored her vision. Inside, Noah toddled unsteadily around the living room, occasionally steadying himself against furniture that would soon be moved to the new house. Diana was out, meeting with the interior designer for their new home, a welcome absence that allowed Dad and me to speak freely. "What will you do with the house?" Dad asked as we sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee from mugs Mom had collected from thrift stores, items Diana had apparently retrieved from donation after our confrontation. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "I can't move back right away. I've been accepted to Rhode Island School of Design for the fall, a transfer program to finish my BFA in photography." Dad's face lit up. "Emma, that's wonderful. Your dream school. Why didn't you tell me?" "I just got the acceptance last week, and the scholarship. The combination of Grandma's gift and the substantial merit scholarship made RISD financially feasible, a possibility I hadn't dared to consider until recently." "Your mother would be over the moon," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "This calls for a celebration. Dinner tonight? My treat. You can choose the restaurant." Later, as I wandered through the house alone, Dad having taken Noah upstairs for his nap, I found myself in what had been Mom's studio, then briefly my bedroom, then Noah's nursery, and now a half-emptied space in transition once again. The nautical-themed wallpaper was already being removed, strips of blue paper with sailing ships hanging loosely from the walls. Standing there, I had a moment of clarity. This house would always be in flux, changing with each occupant, each phase of life. Mom had understood that when she created the trust. She hadn't expected the house to remain frozen in time, a museum to our past together. She had wanted it to be a foundation for my future, whatever form that might take. And suddenly, I knew what I wanted to do. Not immediately, but eventually, after RISD, After establishing myself as a photographer, perhaps in a few years, I would return to Portland, not to live in this house, which carried too many complicated memories, but to the craftsman 2 doors down that I'd seen listed for sale. I'd use the rental income from the family home to help finance the purchase, creating a scenario where I could be close enough to oversee the property and maintain Mom's memorial garden, yet have my own space, my own fresh start. Noah would grow up knowing his big sister, not as a distant figure who visited occasionally from Boston, but as a neighbor, a regular presence in his life. I would tell him stories about Mom, share photographs of our family before he was born, ensure he understood that his heritage included a woman who had loved gardens and art and had left an indelible mark on our family, even in her absence. The K. House Diana had tried so hard to remake would remain a connection to Mom, not through unchanged physical spaces, but through its very existence as my inheritance, as the foundation for my independent adult life. Mom's foresight had given me options, security, and ultimately freedom, not to be bound by the past, but to honor it while building something new. That evening at dinner, just Dad and me at the local Italian restaurant Mom had loved, I shared my emerging plan. His face registered surprise, then thoughtful consideration. 2 doors down? The Jensen place? I nodded. It needs work, but it's a good house, and being nearby would mean you could be part of Noah's life, Dad finished for me, and keep an eye on your property. Both, I acknowledged. It wouldn't be immediate. I need to finish at RISD first, but in a few years maybe. Dad smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Your mother would approve, not just of the practicality, but of the way you're honoring the past while creating your own future. As we walked back to his car after dinner, the summer evening warm around us, Dad hesitated, then asked, "Have you told Diana about the trust yet? About the house being yours?" "No," I admitted. "I thought that conversation should come from you." He nodded, accepting the responsibility. "I'll tell her before we move. She should understand the legal situation." He glanced at me sideways. "She might not take it well." "I imagine not." The thought of Diana's reaction to learning the house she'd so thoroughly remade legally belonged to me, the stepdaughter she'd tried to erase along with Mom's memory, brought a small, admittedly petty satisfaction. But it doesn't change anything. Immediately, "You're welcome to find tenants after you move. I trust your judgment on that." The generosity of the offer seemed to touch him. "Thank you, Emma, for everything. For fighting for your mother's memory. For being willing to be part of Noah's life despite your feelings about Diana. For finding a way forward that honors everyone." It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be. Diana remained a thorn in my side, a woman who had tried to erase my mother and push me out of my own home. But she was also Noah's mother, a permanent fixture in our complicated family constellation. Finding a way to coexist, to create boundaries that protected what mattered while allowing for new growth, was the mature path forward. 2 days before I was scheduled to return to Boston, I visited the house alone. Dad, Diana, and Noah were at their new place, overseeing furniture deliveries. The family home stood quiet, half-packed, in a state of transition that mirrored my own life. I walked from room to room, not in grief this time, but in recognition. Here was the kitchen where Mom had taught me to bake bread. Here was the living room where we'd built blanket forts on rainy weekends. Here was the porch, now enclosed as a sunroom, where we'd read books side by side on summer evenings. The physical spaces had changed, but the memories remained, not tied to walls or floors, but carried within me. Mom had known that. Her letter had said it clearly. The house is just wood and stone. It's the love we filled it with that matters. That love isn't contained by walls. It travels with you, wherever you go. In the backyard, I knelt beside the memorial garden, touching the soil Mom had once tended. New flowers bloomed here now, planted by different hands but growing in the bow, same earth. There was a metaphor in that, something about continuity and change that felt right. Looking up at the house, gray now instead of yellow, modern where it had once been charmingly dated, I made a silent promise. I would honor the gift Mom had given me, not by clinging to the past or by erasing it, but by building a future that incorporated the best of what had been while creating space for what could be. Diana had tried to throw away my belongings, to erase my mother's presence, to remake the house in her image. What she hadn't known, what Dad had concealed from her, was that the house had never truly been hers to change. It had always been my inheritance, my foundation, my future to determine. I stood, brushing soil from my hands, and walked back, toward the house that would, in a very real sense, always be mine. Not because of legal documents or trust provisions, but because it contained the imprint of the family that had loved me first and best. No renovation could erase that. No new paint color could cover it. No strategic redecorating could remove the essence of what this place had been, and would always be. To me, home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.